Hey guys, welcome to Ball Cap Sports. We have a lot going on, a lot to dive into, not a lot of time to do it, so we're just going to go. The biggest news of the hour is the Hall of Fame voting. And we had Derek Jeter coming in one vote shy of a perfect 100% induction in his first year of eligibility. Misses out. Certainly was never any doubt that he would get in on his first try. 5 times World Series champion, 2000 World Series MVP, just under 3,500 career hits, a 14-time All-Star, just one of the greatest shortstops we've ever seen in the game. And he came one vote shy. It will be very interesting to see who that one voter was. So we get Derek Jeter, which we all expected. And we had a very interesting situation earlier in the day because we were getting these early returns, if you will, where we had the polls or the voting that had been made public. And at that time, it looked like Jeter, certainly, but Walker and Schilling were knocking on the door. And with those early returns, we had what looked like a chance that we could see some shocking news as both Bonds and Clemens were within reaching distance of the 75% that is needed. Now, they did not end up getting it. We'll put up the total voting right here. So Derek Jeter got the 99.7% on his first year, and Larry Walker gets in 6 votes ahead of the cutoff mark. 304 votes, gets to 76%. Larry Walker, an interesting story because he played all those years in Colorado, and I think that's where a lot of people maybe want to discount what he did, but he still had a fantastic career, played more games away from Colorado than at home in Colorado because he had those years in Montreal, and he finished up with the Cardinals. Overall, the MVP in 97, 3-time MLB batting champion, 7 gold gloves, 383 home runs, 230 steals. People forget that he could run, and an OPS, a career OPS, just under 1,000, which is fantastic. So he gets in on his 10th and final try, and that opens up the whole debate of, what makes you a Hall of Famer your 10th year that didn't make you a Hall of Famer your first year, and do we need to create a separate wing for guys who just barely get in on their last year? Because is Larry Walker as much of a Hall of Famer as Derek Jeter? There's your argument, and that is the argument that makes the Hall of Fame so special is you can have these conversations and kind of dig into it. So we get Larry Walker, we get Derek Jeter, and we don't get CURT Schilling. CURT Schilling just misses. He comes in at 70%. He's got 2 more years of eligibility to see where he lands. CURT Schilling's numbers, the 2001 World Series MVP. He has 3 world championships, 3-time Cy Young runner-up. Really was one of the dominant pitchers of his time. He has some amazing history with the Red Sox, with the bloody sock, and going out there and gutting out that Game 6 of the ALCS. He won the World Series with the Diamondbacks. It was him and Randy Johnson. He had the Phillies in the World Series in 93. They didn't win that. They lost to the Blue Jays. CURT Schilling comes up just short, but kind of looks like he may be trending in a direction where he gets in next year. One thing we're going to take a look at real quick here. I want to pull up, I'm not going to pull up, but I do have the eligibles, because an important thing to consider when looking at 2021 voting is who's coming into the ballot. We're going to have Mark Burley, AJ Burnett, Michael Kadire, Dan Herron, Tim Hudson, Torrey Hunter, Adam LaRoche, Aramis Ramirez, Alex Rios, Nick Swisher, Dan Ugla, Shane Victorino, and Barry Zito coming in next year. The only player in that group of names that even has a chance to make an impact, a real impact, is Torrey Hunter. Torrey Hunter, a 9-time Gold Glover, a 5-time All-Star, one of the best center fielders during his time on the field. So we'll see Torrey Hunter, but it's going to leave a lot of votes for for CURT Schilling. And that's what it is, because you've got guys that vote differently. You got guys that just pick one guy. They just pick four guys. They just, whatever they do. And that means if you don't have a swell of first-time candidates, guys that have been on for 7, 8, 9 years can get a boost. And I think Schilling could get that boost next year. So let's take a look at the rest of the voting real quick. So we had Schilling at 70%, Roger Clemens at 61, Barry Bonds at 60. We'll get into that in a minute, but those two start to come within striking distance for their final year. That's going to be an interesting conversation. Omar Vizquel, he is going to get in 52% on his third year of eligibility. He should see a boost next year. Scott Rolen is 35%. He'll probably get a boost. Billy Wagner probably gets a boost. Gary Sheffield. What's amazing is, and I want to just take a look at the ballot in general. Look at these names. Because of the steroid era, guys like Bonds and Sosa and Sheffield and Clemens have kind of been held back. And because of that, we look at this ballot and there's so many names that resonate in Major League Baseball. Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Jason Giambi, Todd Helton, Jeter, who got in, Andrew Jones, Jeff Kent, Cliff Lee, Andy Pettitte, Manny Ramirez, CURT Schilling, Gary Sheffield, Alfons Soriano, Sammy Sosa, Vizquel, Wagner, Walker, who gets in. The ballot is juiced, and a lot of this is held back because of the steroid era and the writers holding guys back who played during the steroid era, even if they didn't have a steroid allegation attached to their name. If they played during that era, they're kind of held back. And there are guys who have fallen off the ballot, like Fred McGriff, who played during the era, who are not on the ballot anymore. They exceeded their limit. So one thing, so let's talk about the situation with Bonds and Clemens, because as we see, we are 61 and 60% voting. These two are getting 242 and 241 votes, which is amazing considering these guys are just, they had syringes falling out of their pockets when they were on the field, essentially. It was amazing. And these guys are starting to knock on the door to where, not next year, but their final year, 2022, is going to be very interesting. Let's take a look. We look at the 2022 candidates. You're going to have Carl Crawford, Prince Fielder, Ryan Howard, Tim Lincecum, Joe Nathan, David Ortiz. David Ortiz, I got to think he's a first ballot guy. Papelbon, Jake Peavy, Przinsky, A-Rod. Oh, boy, that's going to be something. Rollins and Teixeira. So you're going to have in 2022 an amazing conversation, because you're going to have Alex Rodriguez out there with his steroid allegation history. And you're going to have Bonds and you're going to have Clemens in their final year. How will you be able to keep Rodriguez out? I can't imagine Rodriguez gets in on his first shot. But you're going to have two conversations. If Clemens and Bonds do get in because it's their final year, how do you keep Rodriguez out? It's going to be a fascinating conversation. We're 2 years away from that, but that is going to be a fascinating conversation to have at that time. And looking at Clemens and looking at Bonds, 762 home runs for Bonds, most all-time, 7-time MVP, 14-time All-Star. You have the argument that he could have been a Hall of Famer before he started taking steroids, and you can make that conversation about a lot of guys. You can make that conversation about Alfons Soriano. You can make that conversation about Gary Sheffield, guys that had amazing careers in their 20s and then in their 30s maybe tails off because they didn't, because those guys didn't take steroids. So that's a very interesting situation where, what do you do with Bonds? Most home runs all time, and he's sitting on the sideline. Roger Clemens, 7-time Cy Young Award winner. Think about that. 7-time Cy Young Award winner. 354 career wins. Third all-time in strikeouts. Led the league in ERA, and 7 times he was one of the most dominating pitchers. You ask writers, and they will say he is the most dominant pitcher that they ever saw. Roger Clemens knocking on the door. And again, I don't think next year, but in 2022, when it's the final year of his eligibility, very good chance that one of these guys or maybe both of these guys sneak in, which just presents it opens up a can of worms. So we had all of this with the Hall of Fame today. I wanted to talk. We had two other stories in baseball today. One I want to touch on real quick, and it's about Dustin Pedroia. Really sad story, really sad news. He suffered a significant setback with his left knee. That is breaking news today from Pete Abram, who covers the Red Sox for the Boston Globe. Just a real disappointing piece of news that we got. Pedroia's last couple of years have been derailed because of injuries, and now it looks like his career might be over. 14 seasons for Pedroia, a .299 average, 1,800 hits, a Rookie of the Year, an MVP, 4-time All-Star, 4-time Gold Glover, 3 titles. You got to think he's a Hall of Famer. Just circling back to that Hall of Fame conversation, Dustin Pedroia probably deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And these are his career numbers in a snapshot here. Just maybe it's not the totals, but really it was from 2007 until 2017. So that's 11 years. Is that enough time? Ultimately, I think it will be. When it comes time for him to be up on that, up on the Hall of Fame ballot, does he get in on the first time? Does it take him a couple of years? I think maybe because his career is shortened, it could hurt him in not being a first time, on the Hall of Fame his first time through. So we kind of have some disappointing news there with Pedroia. Let me put up his awards. There you can see the MVP, the Rookie of the Year, won the World Series. Got a Silver Slugger too out of second base. When he came up, the big news was, could he hit? And it turns out he could, and he did a good job. Made a great career of it in Boston. Was a part of some great teams, and unfortunately, his setback is going to cut his career short. But I gotta think we end up with a Pedroia Hall of Fame situation. All right. The other piece of news we had today just broke, and that is this one. And that is Marcell Ozuna going to the Braves. 1 year, $18 million. The Braves missed out on Donaldson, so they probably felt like they needed to make a splash, and they certainly do with Marcell Ozuna. He'll be 29 in the 2020 season. So still some good baseball, still in the prime of his career. Last year with St. Louis, 29 home runs, 89 RBIs, and 800 OPS in 130 games. Career slash line is 272, 329, and 455 with a 784 OPS, a 2-time All-Star, 148 home runs, 538 RBIs. The Braves get a good one in Ozuna. At this point, he was probably the most coveted free agent still out on the market. I think that we'll probably do a 5, 6, 7 minute video on Ozuna going to the Braves and breaking that down more later tonight or tomorrow. But he slides into a team. The outfielders Markakis, Inciarte, and Acuna. You got Riley who can play some left field. Ozuna's position has been left. So what does that do to Markakis? Where does he slide to? I think maybe you can have a situation where you have Markakis in right, Acuna in center, and Inciarte can play all over the place. And you have Ozuna at home out there in left field. But that addition sort of gives the Braves that production back that they were fearing that they were going to be without once Donaldson signed with the Twins. So we have Ozuna going to the Braves, 1 year, $18 million, just announced about 15 minutes ago or so. Some big news there, and it's just a 1 year deal. So he will come back out next year and be 30 years old. We'll probably try to pull a Donaldson, gets his 1 year, $18 million, and next year he'll be looking for a 4 or 5 year deal for $100 million if he can produce like he feels he can. Betting on himself, I saw from Heyman, I think it was, that when he comes back on the market next year, he won't. There won't be the whole qualifying offer situation because it's a 1-year deal. So that will help him. That will give him a better shot because teams won't have to give up any draft picks to sign him. So a good move there for the Braves, replacing the Donaldson production. They get Ozuna. They'll stick him out in left field. Again, I think you move Markakis to right, Acuna to center, and Inciarte sort of plays everywhere. He can be your, he can pinch run, a pinch hit. We don't know how much longer Markakis is going to be productive. So, gives you backup in case Markakis starts to fall off. So we had Ozuna signing with the Braves about 15 minutes ago. Earlier this afternoon, we had the news of Pedroia going down, and we had all of the Hall of Fame news. So kind of doing this in a couple parts here. This next part, I'm going to do sort of a deep dive into the ballots, deep dive into the guys who are not in yet, just to kind of talk about them. We already talked about Bonds. We talked about Clemens. We talked about Schilling. We talked about Walker. We didn't get into Scott Rolen. So this is Scott Rolen's, slide here. 316 home runs. It was one of the best third basemen fielding in the game. 8 Gold Gloves. He was a 7-time All-Star. Was the 1997 Rookie of the Year. Let me pull up his numbers real quick. Was in the bigs from 96 to 2012. Came up with the Phillies. Won that Rookie of the Year in 97 when he hit 21 home runs. Drove in 92 runs. Slashed 283, 377, and 469. Rolen was good, and he was productive from 97 up until, I would say he was productive from 97 until 06, and then it started to slip a little bit. A guy that pretty much averaged 25 to 30 home runs, 100 RBIs every year for about 10 years. He saw 5 All-Star games in that peak stretch, and then he sort of, brought his career back in his mid-30s with the Cincinnati Reds. Went to the Reds, made 2 All-Star teams, was actually in the MVP conversation at the age of 35. He was 14th in MVP voting, won a Gold Glove that year. So he spent most of the time with the Phillies. At least he started with the Phillies. Then he had 3 phases of his career: Phillies, Cardinals, Reds, and about a year and a half with the Blue Jays. But most of the time with Phillies, Cardinals, and Reds. Certainly deserving 1,287 RBIs, 316 home runs, a lifetime batting average of 281, 2,000 hits. He doesn't hit those Hall of Fame benchmarks. He doesn't have the 3,000 hits. Doesn't have the 400 or 500 home runs. Doesn't have the 1,500 RBIs. Doesn't have the lifetime batting average over 300. But he's got a handful of All-Stars. He's got 7 All-Stars. He's got 8 Gold Gloves. He's got a Rookie of the Year. He's got some hardware. I think he ends up rising. For sure. You've also got a couple other guys. MLB Stats didn't put together a nice sheet for, but guys like Todd Helton. So Larry Walker getting in is great news for Todd Helton, because Todd Helton kind of is held to the same penalty that Walker was, and that was that they played in Coors Field, which I think is BS, because they didn't choose to put a stadium at the elevation. He spent his entire career with Colorado. Usually that helps guys. Despite having the high batting average, a lifetime 316 average, he hit 372 in 2000. In his late 20s, he was an All-Star every year from 26 to 30 years old. He was hitting home runs 30 to 40 a year. His batting average, he was always in the conversation for league leader in batting average. He was in the MVP discussion from 2000 until 2004, finishing in the top 20 in voting. He was winning Gold Gloves, finished with 369 home runs, 1,400 runs, 1,400 runs batted in, a lifetime average of 316, on-base percentage 414, an OPS of 953. So Larry Walker getting in is great news for guys like Todd Helton. Todd Helton needed that big time because he was going. The argument of Coors Field can't be made for Todd Helton anymore. So you got to think that Todd Helton has a nice shot now that Larry Walker gets in. So we got Todd Helton just missing out. Andrew Jones. Andrew Jones is a great example. When we were talking about Barry Bonds and how he was a Hall of Famer before he started taking steroids. Well, Andrew Jones is a guy who never started taking steroids. And because of that, he's being penalized almost. Because when Andrew Jones was in his 20s, he was one of the best players in baseball. And he sort of just wasn't able to sustain it. And that's why, honestly, that's why he's not in. From the age of 20, when he came up in 1997, up until the age of 29, he was unbelievable. Then he turned 30, and it just kind of fell apart. He couldn't hit anymore. He would still, have the occasional, home run, but his batting average went from, he was a 250 to 300 hitter, anywhere from 98 until 2006. Then it just all fell apart. He hit 158 in 08. He hit 214 in 09. His final year in the bigs, he hit 197. He was only 35, and he just couldn't play anymore. Still hit 14 home runs, so he got to 434 in his career. 1,200 runs scored, just under 1,300 RBIs, a career lifetime average of 257. His OPS career is 823, 434 home runs, but he's penalized for two reasons. That drop off when he turned 30 and the fact that he played during the era of the steroids. So, but there's no links to him, but he's still sitting on the sidelines looking up at the Hall of Fame voting. So Andrew Jones belongs in the Hall of Fame. 5-time All-Star. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Gold Gloves, 10 years in a row. He was the Gold Glove center fielder in the National League. He belongs in the Hall of Fame. There's no doubt about it. The fact that he's not already in is just wrong. It's just wrong in my opinion. So we don't have Andrew Jones. Another guy that's interesting to me is Alfons Soriano. Now, this was his first year on the ballot, and we have Alfons Soriano's career numbers. He's a guy that, at first you thought this guy was certainly going to be a Hall of Famer, right? Came up with the Yankees, had some big moments in the playoffs, was an all-star from 02 to 08, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 straight years. An all-star, was in the MVP conversation many times in his career, went from the Yankees to the Nats, had a great year in Washington, then spent some time with the Cubs. Really from 01 up until 13, his numbers stayed steady. His power, his average, everything was fine. Ended up with 2,095 hits, 412 home runs, a 270 average, an 819 OPS, an all-star those 7 times, in the MVP discussion. Seriously, in 02, he finished 3rd in the voting. In 06, he finished 6th in the voting. You can say that Soriano, now this is his first time on the ballot. So, okay, I'm going to, I'll take it that he's not going to get in on his first time. He's not a first-time Hall of Famer, but we got to get him up there. Alfons Soriano came in with, man, he's not even on here. He didn't even make the top voting here. He may not be back next year. I got to look at his numbers. This is what I have for voting, which would be just amazing. So Soriano is a very interesting case. Omar Vizquel, let's hop over to Vizquel. He misses out, but he's getting close. Omar Vizquel, not really not really going to get in for his hitting, but rather for his fielding. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-time Gold Glover. Was an All-Star 3 times. Was actually in the MVP discussion in '99 with the Indians. So 3-time All-Star. Won a ton of Gold Gloves at shortstop. Was considered one of the best fielding shortstops in the game. Finished with 2,877 hits. And believe me, he was trying to get to 3,000 hits. He played till he was 45 years old. And not once, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, did he have a season where he played enough or got enough at bats to get 100 hits. He finished 123 hits shy of 3,000. He just didn't play enough down the stretch to get the hits. His batting average was still okay in his 40s, 266, 276, 251, 235. Not bad if you're getting a decent shortstop, but his skills had sort of diminished a little bit at that point. But he played from 89 until 2012. If he had gotten to those 3,000 hits, he was going for it. That 3,000 hit number is kind of the, one of the benchmarks. He misses it by 123, but again, he played until he was 45. He probably would have been better to just cut it off after 07 when he was 40 years old. That was his last decent year. He had 126 hits that year. And then he kind of, took a backup role for the most part with the Giants, the Rangers, the White Sox, and the Blue Jays. So, Vizquel will get in 400 steals, 1,400 runs, just missed out on 3,000 hits. But really, why he gets in is from 93 until 02, when he was the best fielding shortstop in baseball. This is not just a hitting Hall of Fame. The great fielders of the game get in, and he certainly belongs in. He's kind of like an Ozzie Smith. Ozzie Smith came up well short of 3,000 hits, but Ozzie Smith was a Gold Glover pretty much every year from 1980 until 1992. Now, what Ozzie had going for him was he was also an All-Star. Ozzie Smith was an All-Star from 81 until 96 every year except 93. So he was in the All-Star game every year. The Wizard was a regular at the All-Star game. Unfortunately, Vizquel only 3 All-Star games. So we had Vizquel just missing out. We have an interesting case with Andy Pettitte. He comes up short as well. Andy Pettitte's numbers, he gets 11% of the vote. Andy Pettitte's career, there were some allegations around, the enhancement, but Andy Pettitte is certainly somebody that you got to think is going to get up there with all of his experience in the playoffs. He was only a 2-time All-Star. He was 3 times. He was an All-Star in 96, 01, and then again in 2010. 256 and 153 record, a 3.85 ERA. Struck out 2,448. But I got to think that his postseason accolades will get him there. 19 wins in the playoffs. He is he was a part of that Yankee dynasty in the 96 to 2000 when they won the 4 World Series. He won another World Series in 09 when the Yankees got back. So a 5-time World Series champion, 19 wins in the playoffs, had 2 wins in that 09 World Series. In the 2000 World Series, didn't have any wins, but pitched to a 1.98 ERA. 1 win in 99, 1 win, only pitched once against the Padres. The Yankees swept the Padres that year. Shut them out 7 1/3 innings, and then to do 1 win against the Braves. So listen, Pettitte's got to, in my mind, eventually get in. I'm kind of surprised he starts out so, he's so low on the voting. again, 256 wins, a 5-time champion, was a very good postseason pitcher. He was reliable. And for now, anyway, Pettitte is sitting on the sideline just watching. Another guy that's, I don't quite get it, but there's been a lot of media guys talking about Jeff Kent and that Jeff Kent belongs in the Hall of Fame. And I don't really know. I watched Jeff Kent's career, came up with the Jays. They sent him to the Mets, but he had his peak career, peak years with the Giants from 97 to 2002. Made his first All-Star games with those Giants teams. Ended up a 5-time All-Star, was the MVP of the 2000 season. But again, he gets dinged for playing during the steroid era. Listen, if we're getting to the point where Clemens and Bonds are getting 60% of the votes, if those guys are getting more than half of the votes, why are we holding guys like this down? Because they don't have the same steroid stench as Bonds and McGuire and Clemens. And we're keeping these guys down just because they were associated with it, associated with the era. I don't know. But Kent 377 home runs, 2,400 hits. I guess here's the thing. Here's the thing with Kent. Again, he sort of peaked in his 30s. Wasn't that great in his 20s. Really peaked in his 30s, but he did have, one of the things steroid guys didn't have, they didn't have a drop off, right? Barry Bonds is still hitting 70 home runs his final year in the big leagues, right? Kent, his last 3 years in the bigs, home run numbers, 14, 20, and 12. So he had the drop off. It's he's very intriguing, didn't make his major league debut till he was 24. The Blue Jays shipped him off. I believe it was part of the Cone trade, the first time they brought Cone around. Part of the David Cone trade. And, only 3.5 years with the Mets, didn't do a whole lot. They dealt him to Cleveland. And then in free agency, he signs with the Giants and really took off in San Francisco. So, Kent is an interesting case. That's for certain. Billy Wagner is interesting too. Talking about relief pitchers, talking about closers. Billy Wagner was certainly one of the best closers that we have had in all of baseball. Let's see, how many times was his ERA under 2? He did it in 99. He did it in 2003. He did it in 05. He did it in 09. He did it in his final year, 2010. 5 times he had an ERA of 1.43, 1.72, 1.78, 1.52 from 97 until 08. The only year he really wasn't closing was 09, but he didn't play all of 09. He came back in his final year, 2010, was an all-star, saved 30 games. He was an all-star 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, 422 career saves. He's up there as one of the greatest closers the game has seen. And I think he deserves to be in. 2.31 lifetime ERA, struck out almost 1,200 batters in 900 innings pitched, was in the Cy Young conversation in 99 and 2006 as a closer, was in the MVP conversation in 03 when he finished 23rd in MVP voting. So Billy Wagner is certainly one of the greatest closers the game has seen. I think it will probably just take some time. We had to wait for Lee Smith had to wait to get in. So Billy Wagner is probably going to have to wait a little bit to get in, but ultimately I do think Wagner gets in. So let's take a look. One other thing I wanted to touch on is Derek Jeter and it was sort of wrap up here is Derek Jeter's vote tally. We have seen one guy get 100%, and that was Mariano Rivera last year. And it looked like there was a chance he was going to get it, that Jeets was going to get it this year. He didn't get it, came 1 vote short. Ken Griffey Jr., the only other guy that came 1 vote short, but I do believe that, let's take a look at it real quick. We had 99.7 for Jeter. Ken Griffey Jr., when he got in, was 99.3. So Jeter does have the second highest percentage to get in. Griffey 99.3, Seaver 98.8. So jumping ahead of some of these guys, and it really is remarkable. Let me put it up on the screen, actually. It is kind of remarkable when you look at the voting history, the guys that didn't get 100%, or the guys that sort of sit behind Derek Jeter now. Willie Mays gets 94% of the vote. How does that even happen? How does Willie Mays not have 100%? How's Babe Ruth not 100%? Ty Cobb 100%. There are Hank Aaron 97.8%. So it's kind of funny to look at that. Jeter, certainly one of the greatest shortstops, gets up there to the second highest percent of ballots with the 99.7, getting in front of Griffey. Both Griffey and Jeter missing the 100% by 1 vote. And this is just a rundown of some of the top percentage of ballots inductees in history. Mo, Griffey, Seaver, Nolan Ryan, and Ripken. That's your question. Who do you want? You want Ripken or you want Ripken or you want Jeter? Jeter won the war. Jeter won all those championships. Ripken did not. Ripken only got 1, and it was early in his career. So if you're ranking shortstops, Wagner was a great player. I say that like I saw it. But Wagner was, looking at his stats, Wagner was fantastic. But that's what it is. That's the Hall of Fame. And it's fun to debate that stuff. It's fun to talk about that stuff, and we'll kind of see where it all goes from there. So to recap, very busy day today. We had the Hall of Fame. Jeter and Walker get in. We have sad news on Dustin Pedroia with his setback, and he is now probably done. His career is going to be over. And we have Marcell Ozuna signing the 1-year, $18 million deal to go play with the Braves for the 2020 season. So we're going to wrap it up. We will be back. Make sure you check back on the channel. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We're doing a ton of baseball content right now. We're doing 2020 projections. We're going to have a video for Ozuna's signing either tonight or tomorrow morning. And, we're going to stay on it. We'll be back as always when news happens, when news breaks in the sporting world. Thanks, guys. Thanks for hopping on, and we'll be back on soon. Check out the channel. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you, and talk soon.